Okay, let's move along into corporate performance. Now, we decided, partly because of the weight of business on this particular board meeting, and partly because we're still not yet quite at the end of January, that a full dissection of winter performance issues would not be coming to this board, but would come to the next. That's what you're expecting, Renette, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. But meanwhile, you're able to give us headline issues from holiday performance, and we will go through our normal performance package with an awareness of some of the challenges that you've been facing in the recent weeks. Okay, so thank you.
So there was a paper that went through in terms of service delivery, which I assume colleagues have noted. And I thought what I would do would be to pick out for us. We've obviously already talked about some of the technical issues that we experienced, but there was almost a perfect storm of other activities which contributed to the poor performance that we've been seeing, not just over the key holiday period, but also since the beginning of January. One of the remedy factors that we've been asked to put in place, obviously not only to satisfy ourselves, but also East of England have asked for a performance improvement plan, which we've provided to them, with trajectories of when we expect to start hitting our KPIs again, and that plan is discussed with them on a weekly basis. So the plan that we're looking at going forward, which I think, picking up a comment that you made earlier, or somebody made earlier, about a busy time that we know is coming up in a couple of months' time, which is Easter, our performance improvement plan does take into consideration the learning that we've taken from winter, in order to make sure that both from a technical and also from a resourcing perspective, we have the right facilities in place to provide a good service every day, not just on the busy days over Easter. And that's what we're aiming to achieve. I don't know how you would like to handle the paper. I think goes into a layer of detail. I'm happy to, rather than to rehearse the themes within it, to take any particular questions that all members might have on how.
Let's do it that way. Yeah. Good. Sue.
It's not a question really. It's recognising the paper as being important. But I'd like to just underline the need to look at to what extent this was foreseeable within our projections. So there's references to the fact that demand was 45% higher than we had in our forecasts. Just for my benefit, I would like to be able to see, compared to what actually happened last year, what that 45% looks like. So when you're doing the deep dive,
I can give you some answers on that now, if that's useful for you, Sue, and others in the board. Yeah. So
just a headline would be useful.
So it's the foreseeable nature.
Yes. To what extent, if you compare the actual outturn to last year's, was it also significantly above last year? And was the through the week was it comparable? And just keep answering the question whenever you look at this. To what extent could this have been foreseen, and or not?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll collect them all up.
Yeah,
and then
we'll collect them.
Because there might be some overlap.
Peter.
Oh, yeah, that's me.
There's you.
Well, can I just say that I was very reassured by although there was obviously adversity was faced here, by the level and detail of your responses, because I think it required a lot of management time and effort to pull things round, as it were. And although I agree with Sue's comment earlier, we perhaps should have foreseen a bit more of what might come, it is reassuring. It's a very comprehensive response that you've given us as to the management action that was taken across the board. And some of the things which you've already talked about, the CAS situation and BT, were even beyond your abilities to deal with, but they were responded to quickly, and I do think that's important to make that point. So I agree with Sue's point. There needs to be a bit more of the stuff she's talked about, the long-term thinking and demand planning. The other thing I just wanted to comment on was the thing which people of my generation are interested in, actually. This the symptom checkers, which we talked about earlier, and where you can go through and click to call back. I think here is a real opportunity if we could get this right. And I see, obviously it didn't work as well as we might perhaps, but I'm just saying it's the callback times really.
Yeah.
But if you can do that, then certainly I know people who tried this out who really expressed a great pleasure in the way it operated for them. Anyway, and I felt that was perhaps something though we could give some priority to the callback system for people who do use the click system. Thank you.
Right. Okay, so I've got Louisa, Tim Walton, Tim.
I thought it was a very thorough response. So I had a question about the low establishment and how much that contributed to it. I thought it was interesting that clearly there were decisions made about priorities, and here you say, given this, it is important that lines of decision making do not become blurred for other members of the team. I just wondered what that meant and whether that is that sort of accountability for decisions and the speed at which they're made. And I'm sure you've always got fantastic processes. I'm sure there are processes, for that. I was just interested in them. And then just sort of really, really small, nitpicking, irritating point. You say that the health and symptom checkers were used about 2.5 times as much, and I just found it helpful in the chief exec's report. It says 430,000, and it's helpful to actually have the number of how much they were used, so that you know how much. And then just a final tiny point is that the vaccination for flu, I know it's something that we've always thought about, but it seemed to me from the sickness absence report that might be a little bit of a red herring.
My favourite red herring.
And I'm really sorry, Chair.
Right.
And I still,
Tim Heyman.
Thanks. Clearly, we had a number of factors. I think it might be helpful, Ronette, maybe not today, but when we do the real drains up on this in a month's time, is almost to have a balance sheet of, we had a planned capacity. Some of that capacity was lost through sickness. We got a bit back here and we lost a bit here, and just see if we can see our way through of things that we could have done differently. I'm a bit concerned that the less take-up of overtime and excess hours than we have previously experienced is a bit of a concern in terms of responsiveness. And I'm not quite sure how large that effect was. You might want to comment about that. Could you include that when you talk back to us then, please? And the other bit was people having flu vaccinations. What sort of percentage of our staff did have flu vaccinations?
Yes, and it's in the sickness paper, but it's fairly small in that what we used was a voucher system. We 173 is what we know had flu vaccinations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that was the only number, because people may have just gone off and had them anyway, and we don't keep the data.
All right, thank you for that. But I think this sort of balance sheet of where the swings and roundabouts from our capacity to the outcome will be quite useful.
Tim.
I was very taken with the comment that you made that by abandoning the CSPT and going on to algorithms unspecified, we could handle calls more quickly.
That's just for the nurses.
So we're saying that if the nurses use their gumption, they can get through the work more quickly. Is that what we're saying?
Not necessarily. I'll let Trish answer that, because
the
that was...
the experienced nurses, our senior band 6 nurses, use a catch-all algorithm, which they find with their experience they can navigate often more quickly than the full symptomatic ones. However, the less experienced nurses, the band 5s for example, don't use that tool. They use the full system and the algorithms within it to support their clinical decision making. But it's been well recognised from other events over when we was in the flu pandemic, using the alternative, the catch-all assessment allows those senior nurses to do exactly what you've described, use their clinical knowledge and experience to support their decision making.
So my accepting that, and that's how I think I interpreted this. Should they not be doing this? Should the more senior nurses not be doing that all the time?
Yes,
perhaps they do.
They
it all the time.
They do.
Right.
They do, and they use a full algorithm for when they experience a symptom that they're less experienced with.
Okay.
Thanks, Trevor.
Like other colleagues, I found this a very helpful report. I've got one area where I'd like a wee bit more explanation, and that's under the lessons and actions going forward, where we say that there is a sense that there are too many targets and that priorities can be distracting. Simplistically, I would have thought when the service is under pressure, the need for clinical priorities becomes even greater. So I just wonder whether you can explain quite what the thinking is around that.
Okay, I think we've collected quite a few things for you there, Ronette.
Okay, so
I'm going to be quite brutal and not allow anybody else to overwhelm you with more supplementaries.
And
So-
I can pick up lots of these in more detail when we talk again in February.
Thank you, yeah.
But just to reassure the board, so picking up Sue's and others' points about the foreseeable nature of the incidents. One of the tools that we use in order to get an indication, this is all about forecasting really, isn't it? Yeah? So one of the tools that we use to get an indication of what's this Christmas going to be like is by looking at all the Christmases that have been before. Now there are obviously changes in terms of what day does Christmas Day fall on, and with the extended bank holidays that we had this year, where we had 4 days, which happens every 5 years or something like that, where Christmas falls on this particular day. Now one of the things that made this year different than previous years is normally the difference in call volumes between November and December is about 8% growth. This year it was 128%. So for the last 80 years where we've got the data, it's always been 8% there or thereabouts. This year it was 28%. So we've always taken November is an indicator of what happened in the previous year. So, and as the board will remember, we were sitting here back in August and time talking about the fact that we were forecasting more calls than were actually coming in. So all year we've been more or less under, and we've built our capacity plans around that, and then all of a sudden we've had this major upsurge within December. And one of the things that the team are working on is, we've got the data, that's fine, but what were the contributory factors? What were the true contributory factors that made this a strange year in terms of demand on the services? In terms of the click to callback, I'm very pleased with Peter's assertion, because that's exactly what we designed that service to be, was that the people that use our health and symptom checkers online have done the first part of the assessment themselves, and rather than going through and speaking to a health advisor again, the click to callback system means that they don't need to speak to a health advisor, they go straight into the nurse advice or the health information advice queue. One of the big challenges that we've got within the organisation still, though, is the people on the phone seeing the calls that are coming in from the click to callback as being equally as important as the ones that have been triaged on the phone by one of their colleagues. So we're getting there. Last year, for example, the decision was taken to turn the click to callback off. This year,
Year before last.
This year it's remained steadfastly on. Year before last, yeah. So, and the proportionality of calls that come through is much higher as a proportion of all calls that we deal with. So, but there is still some work that we need to do now that we've got the full suite of health and symptoms checkers in refining them so that appropriate priorities are coming through, which is all about the wording of the health and symptoms checkers in the first place.
Right.
So the business case, as you'll remember, Peter, because you were on the finance committee at the time, was all predicated around being able to save particular resources because we thought there would be a substitutional effect. Actually, it seems like health and symptoms checkers have had more of an additional effect rather than a substitutional one. So there's more work that we need to do about how do we promote those, etc. And Louise, I'll pick up your point in terms of putting the absolute numbers of usage. It's actually in one of the other reports, and I just don't want to repeat stuff.